Welcome to Café with Cavanha. With me today is Zachary Rogers, assistant professor at Colorado State University. We invited him to talk about supply chain cybersecurity. Good afternoon, Professor Zachary Rogers.
Hi, good afternoon, or maybe good evening where you are. Good to
Yeah,
see you.
it's good and really is not cold here. It's good.
Right.
Professor, please, cases of cyber attacks and supply chain are
Yes,
frequent, are common, and can you bring us some case that you have known?
absolutely. It's something I'm very interested in, and I've been studying the way that cyber attacks happen for about 3 years. And actually, a colleague and I are currently writing an event study paper where we kind of look at all of the cyber attacks that have happened, the publicly reported ones that have happened over the last few years in the United States, and how the number of attacks going through the supply chain has changed as a percentage. I'll just give you this number. In 2011, 27%, so about a quarter of attacks happened through the supply chain. In 2017, which is the most recent year we have data from, it was 61%.
Wow.
So it's gone from a little more than a quarter to almost 2/3 of attacks are coming through the supply chain. And for those of you, for the listeners who who are not familiar with this idea, I'll give you some examples. So imagine that what most attackers or hackers want to get into is a big company, because the big companies have all the money, they have all the data, they have the credit card numbers, the social security numbers, everything that you would want. Because they have all of these valuable things, their defense is very strong. Okay, so an example I'll talk about in a second is Target, which is a retailer here in the United States, a lot like Walmart. And Target has a whole floor of people in some building in Minnesota working on their cybersecurity. Now, they also have a lot of suppliers, and some of these suppliers are small. In fact, when Target was breached in 2013, the attack was not launched at Target itself, because going at Target, that's hard. That's a hard shell to penetrate. But if you can go through the supplier and get their credentials, and then use those to get into Target, that makes a lot more sense. And so when Target was hacked, it was actually a small air conditioning company called Fazio. And Fazio has 125 employees, private, they had the free version of the antivirus software. So the computer that we're doing this on right now at your house had better protection than the one that this company had.
My
And so
God.
because when it's free software, it doesn't do continuous updates. You have to click, okay, check my computer, please. And so they sent a bunch of phishing emails, and the attackers were clever. They essentially sent emails to all of Target's small suppliers, these sort of phishing emails. And Fazio was the one that happened to open it, and because they don't care where they get in, they just care that there's, it's like when an animal will test the fence, and then they find the weak spot, and then they go. And that's what very similar to the hackers and the animals trying to break out of the farm. And so they got in, and they were able to steal Fazio's login credentials, use those to get into Target. And Target at the time didn't have any segmentation in their back office system, especially for small suppliers. And so they got in, and I think they ended up stealing something like 100, and I have the exact number written down. Let me tell you what it was exactly. The information from 110 million customers ended up costing Target $165 million. And this one in particular, I'm passionate about, because I was one of those 110 million that got caught up in this attack. And the day I found out, I'll never forget. I was watching a basketball game, and my wife stepped in front of the TV, and I said, "Oh, you think you're gonna keep going, or what's the plan?" And she said, "Well, do you think you're gonna tell me why you opened up 3 accounts on dating sites this morning?" So someone had stolen our credit card and opened up a bunch of dating profiles, and my wife found it, and it took some explaining. She said, "No, it wasn't me. it was without me. It's Target." So, for all of the husbands around the world, I'm very interested in how we slow this down, basically. And there's an interesting lesson with the Target thing. So, yes, of course, there's the kind of obvious thing. attackers are going through the suppliers that have low defenses to get into the big prizes. But Target had particularly bad segmentation in their back office system, something called defense in depth. And the idea of defense in depth is if you think of your as a company like a house, right? If you get into the front door, if there's no defense in depth, okay, I'm in the front door, now I can go anywhere that I want. Defense in depth is kind of the idea, well, there's a door between the kitchen and to the bedroom, all the other rooms, okay? Target didn't have that because Spazio was so small. And so it's sort of the inverse of what we generally see with supplier management. Generally with supplier management, you kind of do the A, B, C. Okay, our A suppliers, we're going to pay a lot of attention to them because that's a big spend for us. We spend a lot of money with them, but we really need to pay attention to them. With cyber attacks, it tends to be that attackers go after the smallest suppliers, the suppliers that maybe a big retailer like Target or some other big buying company wouldn't be paying attention to. And so in order to deal with this, supply managers sort of have to invert their strategy where they, instead of not paying attention to the small people, only pay attention to the big suppliers, you have to pay some more attention to the smaller suppliers. And now, the argument against that is, well, if I have hundreds of suppliers or thousands of suppliers, how can I do this? And so that's where defense in depth comes in. And so it's up to supply managers, and I'm writing a piece about this that I'll send you. Supply managers need to work with, whoever the end user is, this product. So engineering is buying this product, whoever it is, as well as with the computer people in the back, the IT people, and say, okay, this is an air conditioning supplier. They only need to access this small part of our back office system. They do not need to get into the part of our back office system with our point of sale system where we're storing customer credit cards. And so by setting up these controls and barriers in the background, in the back office system, you can get around this problem of how do we monitor all of these tiny, small suppliers, essentially.
As separating vulnerabilities and risks in different classes.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, if you go back to the house analogy, think of it like, okay, I'm having somebody come to fix my refrigerator. This person should only be in my kitchen. They don't need to go upstairs to my bedroom. They don't need to go to the basement. And so you would set up, if somebody came in, a plumber comes into your house, you're not going to say, yeah, go wherever you want, just not watch them, right? You want them to just go where they need to go. And it needs to be the same way with this back office segment.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So, go ahead, please.
No, please go ahead.
And I will tell you, by the way. Walmart had that same supplier.
Oh yeah.
Spazio was their supplier too, but Walmart had segmentation in their back office system. So Target compromised 110 million records, cost $160 million. Walmart lost 0 records and $0. And so this segmentation in the back pays off quite a bit.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah. And Zachary, tell me, what's the trend considering the artificial intelligence increasing, machine learning, and other IOT systems? Yeah. What the trend for these systems is becoming more vulnerable or not?
Right. So yes. So the more connected devices you have, the more vulnerabilities there are. So attackers can come from many different ways. Like we have a case in here where one of the big hotels in Las Vegas was hacked through their fish tank. So they had a fish tank that they had connected to the internet because like they wanted the lights in it to change when the time changed and kind of flash sometimes. And so they had this, which is a really cool looking fish tank, but hackers were able to get into that fish tank and then get into where they had credit cards stored. And so as you have more and more connected devices, there are more points of entry. And you see this, it's sort of this tension between we want to be more connected, we want to be faster, but also we have to be safe. And that's why I think you see the slowness, especially in the US, of the 5G network. Yeah. Is the 5G network isn't quite secure yet. It's not quite ready. And so even though the technology might be there, companies, especially in the United States, are taking it very slowly because, once 5G is up, there will be more options for hackers to, you can do things so much faster. And so there will be more vulnerabilities there. But, there is also technologies that exist, I think, where you can counteract these. I think that blockchain is an important technology to sort of work against IoT because you can have records everywhere and you can really drill in on things. And the thing is, it's always been an arms race. It's always been an arms race between what's, the red team and the blue team. So in cybersecurity literature, the red team is the attackers, the people who are trying to get you, and then the blue team is the defenders. And there's always a give and a take. And, it does happen that a lot of really interesting innovations happen with the red team. The blue team has them too, of course, but the red team, they're creative. And there's so many, there'll just be a new way to breach something all the time, which is why, your computer is always telling you, hey, please update my software because bad guys figured out a new way to get to you or whatever. And the not updating of software ties into a many attacks. So Equifax, the large credit card company in the U.S. that was breached something like 150 million credit cards, all this social security numbers, all the identifying information. That happened because so this goes 2 levels deep. So they had a contractor who worked for them who managed some software system. And there was a bug in that software system that needed to be patched. And so the vulnerability was in the software the contractor was using on behalf of Equifax. So now we have multiple levels. And that contractor didn't update the software when they needed to. And so it didn't work out. And attackers were able to get in and get 150 million credit cards. The WannaCry attack, which shut down some of the hospitals in the UK. It caused problems, I know, at Nissan factories and all over the place. The WannaCry attack mostly happened with people who were still running like Microsoft Windows 2010 and 2007. So, old stuff that they don't really update 2007 that much anymore. Windows 2007 is not a priority for Microsoft. And so the people running these old operating systems were the one that were vulnerable to this WannaCry bot. And it shut down, hospitals and manufacturing plants all over the world.
If you can give us a prescription, like a physician, a doctor, sure. What companies must do to protect and to avoid some of these vulnerabilities?
Well, I think the first thing is that, and probably you'll like this, it all comes down to supply chain. So very similar to, if we think about how companies have attacked sustainability for the last 15 years. 15 years ago, how many supply managers had sustainability as one of their key supplier metrics? Not very many. I don't know if you recall, but Walmart around 2006 said, okay, we're going to put sustainability on our supplier scorecard. And there was some concern in the stock market, is this a good idea or not? And now, any company anywhere has sustainability on their scorecard. It's something that they're judged on. We interviewed a lot of supply managers from a bunch of big companies in the United States. Said, hey, how many of you have cybersecurity as one of your major supplier metrics that you're measuring? And not a lot of them did. And so part of it is just, the awareness. We go back to the analogy of the house. Okay, so we have this house and it's well protected, but you can get into the front door if you have a key. Mm-hmm. Supply managers, purchasing managers are the ones giving out keys to suppliers. And so there needs to be auditing. There needs to be some sort of, general levels that the suppliers have to achieve in order to have, sufficient cybersecurity. And luckily, there's a lot of international standards that, you don't have to create these out of whole cloth. There's, the ISO 27001 and things like that, NARS, things like that in the United States, where, and there's also some industry specific, there's cybersecurity, regulations for retail and for electronics and things like that, where there's industry specific standards. And so making sure that following those standards is part of your supplier scorecard and it's something that suppliers will be, graded on, is the first step. Just getting it the same way we had to bring sustainability, people will do whatever their incentives tell them to do. So sustainability becomes one of the things that you are judged on. Sustainability becomes important. In that same way, we need to make sure that cybersecurity in the supply chain, because like we said, 61% of attacks are coming through the supply chain. That also needs to be something that suppliers are graded on.
Zachary, do you have statistics? I mean, research in terms of providers? How many of them have these situations? Would be a good idea to make a research, specifically in Brazil, for instance, so we can make a research, see how many of them have these problems.
Right. So it's quite a few firms. I could, and we're actually working on a project now. We're doing an event study. I was working on it this morning, actually. I need to get it done. And we have, I think in this study, we have somewhere around 300 or 400, big firms that this has happened to. And this is only publicly traded firms in the United States. So this is a very small slice of what we're looking at. But like we said, more than 2/3 of these attacks are coming through the supply chain. And it's interesting, it also tends to be, because we're looking at, okay, what's the fallout in the stock market when this happens? And it's interesting, I didn't know that there would be any difference, but the attacks through the supply chain tend to actually have a bigger impact on stock price. And that's, I think, because the attacks that happen through the supply chain tend to be a little more devastating. Because you can get into the back office system and really kind of go nuts. And that's all of the big ones, Home Depot, Target, Equifax, Walmart last year. All of the big attacks have happened through the supply chain. Even this one that happened 3 weeks ago with Capital One. The Capital One attack happened because they had an AWS account. Amazon was managing all their servers, and a woman who worked at AWS had figured out where a flaw was, quit her job. So she was no longer with Amazon, but she found out what their flaw was from being their supplier and went in and stole millions of credit cards again. And so all of the big attacks that you've seen over the last year, almost without exception, have happened because of a weakness in a supplier, and that leads to a vulnerability in the buying firm.
Excellent. That's a very, very interesting topic, this one, for cyber attacks and cybersecurity. For sure, we need to have more conversation about this.
Absolutely, yeah. And it is encouraging. It does seem like firms are starting to pay attention to it. There's more conferences, where I was at a purchasing conference recently where cybersecurity was talked about. I just submitted a book chapter for a supply chain textbook that's about cybersecurity. I don't think there's been that many cybersecurity book chapters before. Hopefully the editors like it and it gets to stay in the book, but we'll find out soon. And so there is more attention moving towards it. But we still have a long ways to go. I liken this moment with cybersecurity to the late 70s with quality, or the late 90s, early 2000s with sustainability. We now understand that it's a supply chain problem, and now we can get moving on it. But similar to sustainability, we could be 10 years down the road and still have a ways to go. Especially, as you mentioned, because of the increased connectivity, and as more and more data, more valuable data moves to the cloud and things like that, it becomes more and more attractive for attackers. So, I think this is a trend that's going to keep going, but I also think that it's something that now that we know we have to address it, I think we'll be able to address it.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate this conversation. It's very useful for us.
Absolutely. I was excited. I was looking forward to it all day. I even brought my my cafecomcavanha mug to work today to celebrate. So I'm always happy to talk with you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you very much.
You too. Thank you. Goodbye.
Good day, Paul. Thank you. Bye-bye.